Hey guys, Jim here. Welcome back once again. Today we're going to dive deep into a brand new series of knives by Todd Begg called the War Junkie. Now, today's video is going to be rather special because I'm not going to be showcasing one knife. Obviously, I'm going to be showcasing four of the knives in the collection. But on top of that, we're going to get in-depth on each individual knife, the inspiration, where they came from, why they're being made as production knives, and any and all questions you might have. We're going to hear that from Mr. Todd Begg himself. But before we get to Todd and his jolly self, we're going to take a quick close-up look at the knives because I'm not going to be able to do the close-ups as effectively when we're in that interview setting. So, first off, we're going to take a look at the PDK, which stands for Personal Defense Kukri. And yeah, this is holy shit. This is a big, bad mamma jamma right here. Now, a lot of people love Kukri designs. That's the Nepalese design made basically for everything that the Nepalese soldiers could have ever wanted. Not only for, well, killing and beheading people and other things of violent nature, but getting to the fight, getting through the jungles and hacking through all of the brush and the trees and everything else. The Kukri really was a great multi-purpose tool. It wasn't simply just a weapon. Obviously, it was a very effective weapon, but it is obviously a tool on top of that. And the problem with Kukris is they're generally very, very large. Now, they're obviously made in various different sizes in the traditional versions. However, there really aren't a lot available that are in a good carry size, something that you might maybe throw in your backpack or throw onto your belt when you're going out into the woods or whatever your personal needs are. Maybe you want to carry it every day. I don't see why you would need to, but you don't necessarily need to carry anything every day. It's because you want to. So what Todd did was design something that was more of a carry size. Now, as we go through these knives, I'm going to give you the tech specs here so that we're not muddied down with that during the interview process. So the PDK, Personal Defense Kukri, is 11 3/4 inches overall length, which, yeah, that's big. However, it's still a manageable size if you wanted to carry it. And you're going to be getting a 6-inch blade, and the cutting edge goes all the way back. On the other versions of these knives, we're going to be talking about the overall blade length and then what the cutting edge might be due to a finger choil or sharpening choil that may be on the blade. This one, the edge goes all the way back. Really, really nice feel in the hand, obviously, as Kukris are. They're very, very ergonomic, designed for different types of handholds. If you want to get a little bit more extension, you can grab them out from the rearmost portion of the handle. For more control over your cutting or chopping, you would choke up on it. And he's given you jimping here and here. So no matter how you're gripping it, number one, you're going to have great control. Number two, you're less likely to slide up into that blade, which will probably sever digits. Very, very, very nicely done. They did a great job on recreating Todd's really, really nice radius plunges, sweeping plunges. Really great job on that. And we're going to talk more about the manufacturer when I get Todd in front of the camera, because I want you to see how he feels about them. He's very, very excited about working with them. He wanted to keep this series all American made. He wanted the best possible quality control and to be able to put out some fairly reasonable prices. For example, this one, $550. Sheath is included in all the prices I'll be mentioning. So there it is. You do have a lanyard opening. And for a knife like this, I can definitely see you wanting to have a lanyard up around your wrist if you're doing any kind of chopping or anything like that. It's going to be a really good idea to kind of keep that secured. You've got Todd's signature fuller with the alternating size holes. Often imitated, never truly replicated. And there is a quick close-up. There is the War Junkie logo. Nice sculpting. I love the way that he shaped these G10 handles. Everything is really nicely contoured and comfortable. He does leave the tang exposed all the way around. However, the tang is completely rounded, so it's very, very comfortable in the hand. By leaving the tang exposed like this on these knives, it's really good for indexing. You always know where the knife, the blade of the knife is in your hands at all times. All right, let's get rid of that big bad boy and get to what might be my personal favorite. I'm kind of torn between these two, between the Dagger and the Recondo. Man, I don't know if I can really choose, and that's a hard position for me to be in, to love both of these as much as I do. But let's get to the Recondo next. The Recondo, basically this is his version of the MACV SOG knife, the Military Assist Command Vietnam Studies and Observation Group SOG knife. And I'll let Todd give you more details about that because he is well versed in that, being Special Forces himself, and he can give you an idea of what made him want to replicate this style of knife. Obviously, even though it is it's based on a currently designed knife or currently existing knife, he's obviously put his twist on it. One of the things I love about this knife that the others do not have, well, the Dagger does, sort of. You've got a really nice attitude adjuster back here. Whether you want to call it a skull breaker, a skull cracker, a glass breaker, I like to call them an attitude adjuster. Shove that into any fine pressure point in the human body, and the subject will comply. But this one, I feel probably out of all of them, feels like it's the lightest weight. Yeah, it really is. This and the Dagger are almost equal in weight. Dagger may be a little tiny bit lighter, but I love the balance of this particular knife in the hand. It feels really, really good. Again, jimping right where you need it. You do have a finger choil here. I look at it more of as a relief for the blade, more of a sharpening choil. If you've got big fat fingers, you might end up cutting yourself, but if you have slimmer fingers, you'll be fine. Let's give you a nice quick close-up here. Really nice edge. These are ground very, very thin, by the way. It's going to be really, really good for slicing. There is his fuller with the alternating sized holes. Once again, the scale cut out around that design. Coming back to the attitude adjuster, which is the only part that is not gently rounded off. That comes to kind of a chisel. And I love the fact that they're just all friggin' black. All black, man. Now, he had a lot of different choices, obviously, to go with for steel. Even though, and this one, by the way, is $400, even though they're in the lower end of the price range for anything that he's ever made, he didn't want to sacrifice the steel, so he went for S35VN. For those that think that S35VN is somewhat of a pedestrian steel, I want you to realize something. It's like talking about a Corvette. You see Corvettes all the time. Every stoplight, every neighborhood, every business complex parking lot. You're so used to seeing Corvettes that you really forget how special they really are, just because they are more readily available. It's a fast-ass car. And I'm not even talking about the new C8. I'm talking C7, C6s, Z06s, Z01s. You forget just how butt-numbing fast that car is, only because you see it all the time. Well, with S35VN, thanks to Chris Reeve, you know, with the Sebenzas and the Unumzans, we're so used to seeing that proliferation of this one blade steel that we forget that it took years to develop to create a better version of S30V, which for years was a perfectly acceptable fine steel, to then be improved upon and create what is really one of the best EDC steels that there is. And one thing that most people that don't make knives don't understand is S35VN is actually very, very, very expensive. You can buy a whole host of other steels that you can rattle off the top of your head and spend less than you will for S35VN. The good things about S35VN is it's going to hold its edge really, really well, especially when you get into the higher hardness levels. Again, since I brought up Chris Reeve, one of the things that people dislike about S35VN and just kind of attribute it to that steel is that it might be too soft and not hold an edge very long. That's because Chris Reeve has chosen to heat treat it on the lower end. I believe, don't quote me, I think it's like 58, 59 on the Rockwell scale. When you get higher, obviously it gets harder. When it gets harder, it gets better wear resistance. So we will find out from Todd what the Rockwell hardness is on these. I hope I don't forget to ask. But Todd chose this steel specifically because it is one of the best all-around performers. It is tough, and it is hard, and it is very, very stain resistant, and it is very, very corrosion resistant. Now, it's not a huge deal for most of the blade since they're done in this black PVD coating. However, you still have to worry about your cutting edge, and that being exposed steel, if you don't want that to rust and corrode easily, especially if you're going to be using these knives. And that's exactly what these are made for. They're made to be used. Man, I really love the ergonomics on the Recondo the most. It's slim, it's just wide enough to fill my hand. The overall length is perfect for me. I wear a size large glove, borderline into an XL. Todd has really huge bear paws, and when he designs a knife, he tries to keep in mind that most people don't have the enormous hands that he does, so he fits them to his hand, and then he shrinks it. I think he said he shrinks it by about 10%, but he shrinks it just a little bit before he finalizes the design. And I gotta tell you, this thing, I don't care how you hold it, it just feels really, really good. This would be great for that backpack knife. This would be great for that EDC fixed blade knife. This would be great for that all-around, I don't care what you throw at it, it's going to work for you kind of knife. Now we're going to get into something that's a little bit more purpose-built. And this one is just simply called the All-Terrain. Yeah, I know, kind of a boring name compared to Recondo and PDK, but it's what it is. It is an all-terrain knife. This was made much more for the outdoorsman. If you're backpacking, if you're camping, if you're hunting, this is much more the style of knife that Todd believes that you would want to carry. It's a bolo-style blade profile, so it's got a very thick and very heavy belly. A little bit of a recurve here, but it drops down to a very, very stout belly, yet you still have a wonderfully reinforced tip if you do have to pierce something. These are $415, so you can get the Recondo for $400. The Kukri, being much bigger and much more everything, harder to grind, is $550. This bad boy is $415. You know what? Oh crap! You know what? I forgot to tell you guys the sizes on the Recondo. My bad. Recondo, 10 inches overall, 5-inch blade from tip to the scale, with a 4.5-inch cutting edge. My apologies for not giving that to you earlier. Now, this one, 9 3/4 inches, so just a teeny tiny bit smaller, and it's just under a 5-inch blade with a 4.5-inch cutting edge. You have a very pronounced choil here, sharpening choil. It is not a finger choil. It's not large enough for that, and the edge goes all the way back, so you would cut yourself. That is a really good utilitarian sharpening choil. I don't care how sloppy you get, you're not going to screw up your edge no matter how you're sharpening it. And look at that edge, by the way. Beautifully done. Nice and clean. And these are all, by the way, scary, scary sharp. That type of sharpness where the edge of the blade feels sticky. That's how sharp these are. Another close-up look here. Look at that, how beautifully the grind is done with this nice pronounced swedge. Again, really nice, clean work on replicating Todd's style of plunges, that sweeping plunge. There again is his fuller with the holes. Lots of jimping on this. Very long section of jimping. And this jimping really is perfect. It's tactile enough where you really feel locked into it, but they have smoothed and rounded it so it's not going to catch on any of the edges. It's not going to tear up your skin. And again, I have to reiterate, these are all made in the USA. There's some more jimping back here. Nice work on the G10. I like the more matte finish that they've done on the G10 as well. There's nothing flashy or pimpy about these knives at all. Really, really good work on these grinds. You have to realize how difficult these knives are to grind, especially with Todd's plunges. I can tell you from experience, because I do radial plunges as well, and Todd taught me how to do them. It is not easy to do, especially over and over and over. Even on a machine ground knife, you're having to tell that machine every little step of what it has to do to grind that blade. I would actually think it's probably harder to program a machine to do a sweeping plunge than to try to teach a human being how to do it. I don't know that that's entirely true, but man, it's got to be really hard to tell that machine exactly what to do, because you're alternating your pressure as you're coming in from here, and you're just gradually coming in more and more and more and more and more and more. You're taking off a significant amount of material, then less and less and less. You're keeping that perfect radius right there. It's trickier than you would think it is. So anyway, not to get off on that whole tangent, this is the all-terrain. This is going to be a little bit more blade heavy because you've got that big fat belly on there. But man, if you were out there in the woods and you really were you know what, man, I'd probably still, me personally, I'd probably still have the Kukri for that. But the Kukri is significantly heavier. It is significantly larger. Maybe a bit more unwieldy because of the shape of it and the way it's going to carry in the sheath. So if you were not a Kukri person, this would be the perfect one, yes, to take out camping, to take out hunting. And as fine as this edge is, I would assume this would be pretty good for skinning as well. All right, now we're going to get to what is, this has been my favorite ever since the beginning. I've watched Todd develop this line over the past year, year and a half. Has it been more than that? Oh my God, almost 2 years. I watched him make the prototypes by hand. I got to play with them, each one as they got finished. I think the only one I didn't play with was the all-terrain. But I had played with the Kukri and the Dagger and the Recondo. And at the time, and I had maintained this for the past nearly 2 years, that the Dagger was my favorite. I love a double-edged dagger. There is something so sexy, but so friggin' mean and just cold and lethal about a really well done double-edged dagger. And I have a hard time now choosing which one I like the most, because this, you know, for such a large knife, it feels so light. It feels so good in the hand, and the grind on this top clip, and there's something so sexy about this. But there's also something about a good quality dagger. You look at the pommel, the way it's very slightly flared here, comes to this point again with an attitude adjuster, less severe than the one on the Recondo because it is a little bit rounded. And again with his fuller and the alternating holes. And I don't want to take too much more time doing this because we need to get to Todd. What we're looking at here is 10.5 inches overall and nearly a 6-inch cutting edge on both sides. Ooh, God, I love this knife. It's really easy to get excited about this knife. It really is. Look at that. I'm having to be super careful about how I hold this, because White River has made these stupidly sharp, and this is sharp obviously on both sides of the blade. Now yes, this will be somewhat more restrictive. Some of you live in cities, I'm sorry, not cities, but states where a double-edged knife is illegal. If that's the case, get the Recondo. Oh, I love that Recondo. But then, if you're an outdoorsy, campy style dude, maybe you want the all-terrain. Or if you're just hardcore and want to look like you can decapitate entire street gangs yourself, well, maybe it's going to be the Kukri. Or maybe because the prices are all between $400 and $550, you can afford to buy them all for less than half of what a custom knife made by Todd would be. And it's very important once again to reference the fact that Todd he's a one-man shop. He is by himself. He is separated from the company that he had founded with his brother and partners. He only makes his custom knives. That's it. And the only other project he's doing right now is this War Junkie line. He previewed it for everybody live at Blade Show 2019. We didn't have Blade Show 2020, thanks to the contagion. So a lot of you got a chance to see the prototypes of these a year and a half ago. But when you're buying a Todd Begg product, you're buying either one of his full customs, which are several thousands of dollars, or you can now get into the War Junkie series, which is, in my opinion, very, very affordable, especially for all that you're getting. I'm going to retire this tabletop session for now, and we're going to cut to some interview style work with Todd. Let him kind of explain where his mindset was when he designed these, why he designed them, and why he chose to go production versus mid-tech or just doing full customs. Catch you guys when we get over to his shop. We are here in Todd Begg's shop. We're going to be discussing the 4 knives I just showed you. We'll talk a little bit more about how the line is going to be expanding and try to get all of your questions answered as best we can about the existing knives. We talked a little bit about the chosen steel, about some of the design, but we're going to get the input from the man himself and find out exactly what makes the War Junkie series so special. Guys, as promised, the man, the myth, the legend is here, Mr. Todd Begg, and he's going to talk to you a little bit about where his new business model has gone, because those of us that have been even semi-familiar with his work over the past, I don't know, 15, 20 years or so, we've really become even more interested when he created the knives like the Bodega and the Field Marshal and so many of the great folders. And you had a chance to buy his knives as a full custom or as a mid-tech, and then later in life as a production, even overseas production. But all of that has changed now, and when you buy a knife from Todd Begg himself, you're buying a full custom knife, which is now why the War Junkie series is so important, because it's the first break that he's made in his new venture that is not just pure handmade custom. So let's welcome Todd to the channel and get an idea of why War Junkie is so important to you and why it should be important to us as well.
Well, like you said, I moved down here to Texas about 3 years ago, and everything out of my shop has been just a full custom, one-off by me, no help, no apprentices or anything like that. But that work is expensive, and it takes a long time to get it. So, as usual, I've got a lot of people that they want something a little quicker, and they want something, a little more affordable. So that's when I started thinking about doing a whole line of fixed blades for now, which I may add folders to later, and that's where we birthed the idea of the War Junkie line.
And that's got to be hard, because you spend a lot of time, as often as you can, going to different knife shows, Blade Show and Blade Show West and New York Custom Knife Show, and as many shows as you can attend to. And you get a chance to meet a lot of your customers, shake hands, BS with them. And it's got to be hard to watch them pick up a knife and fall in love with it and go, I just can't quite set aside that much money to buy one of your knives. Was that one of the big inspirations for creating a production series?
Absolutely. There are so many people that love, they love the knives, but you know what, especially the folders. They're expensive. They're extremely expensive, and they have to be for what they are. There's a lot of work. There's hundreds of hours sometimes, and they're just a different animal.
Yeah, you're putting a big chunk of your life into each one of those knives.
I'm putting up to 2-3 weeks of my life into that piece, and that needs to be paid for. And there's a lot of people that really appreciate that, but they just can't afford it. But they like my designs, they like what I'm doing, and so that's why I wanted to come up with the War Junkie line, just for something that they could say, wow, this is cool, this is, Todd's got his hands all over this thing, and it isn't necessarily made by his hands, but it's designed by him, it's controlled by him, and the whole thing is run by him.
So let's take folders out of the equation here. If you were making a handmade custom fixed blade, general ballpark price point, what would that be from Todd Begg?
Most fixed blades that are going to be like a Cerakoted or a PVD coated, like a tactical one, they're gonna start at $900.
All right, so now you're taking a knife that starts at $900, and I've seen them go up to about $2,000 for your mirror polished and so on and so forth.
Or more sometimes.
So now we can put one of your designs in our hand for in the ballpark of $400 to $500.
That's exactly right.
So now give us an idea where the War Junkie name came from, because many people probably don't know about your personal history before knife making and what you did in the armed forces. Give us a quick background on that, because I think it really relays to the way that you have designed these knives, the way they're balanced, the way the handles are shaped, specifically for not just EDC use, and they are good EDC knives, and you even have one that's a multi-purpose outdoor knife, but every one of these knives is designed for fighting, and they can be used as such. And give us an idea where all that comes from with your military background.
Well, that's something that a lot of people don't know, and I typically don't talk about it. I don't use it as a selling point for my knives. But I was in the Army for 11 years, and I was in NBC Recon, and one of the things that was kind of part and parcel of that was knives. It was edge combat and a lot of training there, and it's something that's really near and dear to my heart. And I carry a knife everywhere I go, for defensive purposes, and I know a lot of other guys that do too, and a lot of guys that really want to use a knife for self-defense, they're going to want a fixed blade.
And you were teaching hand-to-hand and knife combat and everything else when you were in the service, so you're taking all of that experience and putting it into, as beautiful as your designs are, they're always functional before they're beautiful. So you're always really cognizant about how they fit in the hand, how they're going to be held, how they're going to be manipulated in real life use.
To make it clear, there's a lot of my designs that are fantasy inspired, they're sci-fi style, but I also design things that are very purpose driven and very purpose built, and that's a lot of what you're going to see.
That's what we have here.
Line. Yeah, they're going to be, a lot of the bells and whistles have been stripped down to just pure utility, and everything's there for a reason. With aside from like the signature flute, that's kind of a design hallmark, if you will. That's one of my signature features. Everything else is there for a very specific reason, and it's something that it's going to be very apparent once you pick it up and you start using it every day.
All right, let's get into the nitty-gritty on each individual knife. I gave you guys my personal take on each knife, but that means shit when it comes to the man himself who actually designed them. So we're going to talk about how he designed them, why he designed them the way that he did, and we're going to start things off, I believe, with that amazing dagger that I cannot stop fondling.
So this is the War Junkie Dagger. It's a kind of a medium-sized dagger. I wanted something that a guy could carry. It wouldn't be super heavy. It wouldn't be too long, but long enough to do what it's supposed to do. One of the things I did, you'll notice a lot of production daggers are much wider at the point up there, and that's done for warranty reasons.
Really?
They don't want them to snap off.
Sure.
I'm less concerned about that because I want something that's just going to have needle-like penetration. And so you'll notice this dagger is actually much narrower at the point just for thrusting.
Well, you are all about penetration.
Always have been. The handles, we chose G10, the 3D. They're a 1/4 inch thick just to kind of keep the overall thickness lower, and they're thinner just so it's much easier to carry. Screw construction, they're lightened out on the inside, they're milled away, a couple of pockets are milled away. I've got an exposed skull crusher on there if you want to use that. One of the things I've done with this entire lineup is done this redacted tang with the radius, with the redacted scales with the exposed tang, and that's done for a couple of reasons. One is if you have to hit something with it, or if you drop it, it's not going to land right on the G10.
And crack the scales.
And crack the scale. It's going to land on the handle. The other thing it does is it gives you one more little nodule here to reduce the tendency to twist in your hand. And the G10 is actually bead blasted for more texture also. I think that's really important. One of the reasons I went with G10 as opposed to a micarta is great and it's good for, you know, for most situations, but if this is actually carried by a soldier, I had a military contract years ago, and they specifically said no micarta. And the reason is because it absorbs moisture. And
sure.
And if it's in a chemical agent environment, it can't be decontaminated. It has to be discarded. This can be decontaminated because it doesn't absorb anything. The beautiful thing about micarta is it absorbs a little bit and becomes tacky, but that's also its detriment if it's in a chemical agent environment. You're not going to have that with G10.
Now with daggers, you actually have a personal soft spot for daggers. You like double-edged daggers yourself.
I really do. I love daggers. I've always loved them. There's so much you can do with them. They're pretty single purpose. They're not really much of a utility type knife, but when you got to get down and dirty, man, it's really hard to beat them.
Look at the all-terrain. This was the one that I had mentioned in the tabletop portion. Is, you know, the least creative of all the names, but it's probably the name that fits it the most, because this really is, and I'm not an outdoorsy kind of guy, so I can only give limited interpretations of what it could be used for. You've done a lot of outdoorsy kind of stuff, so you have a better idea. This bolo style blade profile that you have on there is actually incredibly useful for a multitude of different things.
That's right. It's the design inspiration from this is basically, when I was a kid, there was a knife called the Puma White Hunter, and it was just prized by so many outdoorsmen at the time, and I loved that knife when I was a kid, and that's kind of where I got the blade inspiration. Of course, I changed it up and made it my own, but it's got a slight recurve. It's got a little bit of a width here and a little bit of a belly if you do have to chop with it. It's not really designed for chopping, but you could skin with this. You could do field tasks with it. It's got a good amount of jimping up here if you have to get up real close and for tight, tight work. I also put a little jimping on the back in case you want to use it backwards. This handle I made a little bit larger and a little more rounded just for multiple different angles that you may use it in. So it's comfortable in any grip. It's not a single purpose. It's more utility, and you can take it anywhere. You can take it to the field. You can take it to the hunting field. It's a camping knife.
Yeah, you had mentioned you could do some skinning with it. I touched on that a little bit because I noticed that all of these are ground very, very, very thin. These are all extremely performance oriented for slicing. These are really, really good cutters.
They really are. I like a thinner edge. A lot of companies you're going to see are going to have a much thicker edge, and then they're going to have a real steep bevel, and that's done for warranty purposes because they're afraid someone's going to chip them out and break them.
Yeah, it makes them a little bit tougher, but they're not going to be as performance oriented.
That's exactly it. Especially on a skinning knife, you want something that's going to get in there and really, really thin it out. And you know what? It's an outdoor utility skinning hunting knife, but also for self-defense, that'd be hard to beat. That'd be a great, really good, comfortable fighting knife.
Oh yeah, it's going to push into the flesh real good. Now let's talk about for a second, while we have that one in your hands, we have your hand-ground prototype here. It's a good time to bring up who you chose for manufacturing and why, because I know through discussions that we've had, I know this has been a project undergoing for about 2 years. You researched not only reaching out to people that you already knew in the industry and already had a reputation, but you pretty much researched everybody out there that offers OEM type services. And you really, I remember one of the big things for you was you really wanted to keep it made in the US. And unfortunately that makes things a lot more expensive. I don't know of a single US manufacturer that can deliver products on time. That's always a very, very big issue. And through all the research you did, tell us why you settled where you did and why.
Well, I was, like you're saying, I was looking around for a U.S. manufacturer that could do this, and this is the handmade prototype that I did, and there's a production version, and they did a fantastic job. And I looked around, and I found White River Knife and Tool, and they were out of Michigan, so they kind of had the same philosophy about 100% made in USA. They wanted And not only made in USA, but all the materials are made in the U.S. Everything is sourced U.S.
That's huge.
It is huge, and it's something that I really wanted to get into. As far as materials, everything on it is 100% U.S. made. And I was looking at the work they were doing, and they were fantastic. They were great craftsmanship they were putting together. And one of the cool things that I found out was once I met the family, and their last name is Kemminga, and I was like, wow, that sounds really familiar, you know. So as we're talking at Blade Show down in the pit, they told me that for the last 35 years they made the lensatic compasses for the military, and I still carry mine all the time, just out of habit. And it was in my go bag, and I pulled it out, and sure enough, on the back of the compass it says Kemminga. This is, that's where I heard your name. I said, I've been using your products for decades, and I didn't know it. And so they got out of the compass game after, you know, all those years, and started making knives for something to do. And they put the same level of attention to detail that they did in the lensatic compass for the military into their knives.
I know one of the biggest concerns for you, because you have a signature DNA that's in all of your products. No matter how wildly different one knife is from the other, the design language is always familiar. Whether it's your grooves, your flutes, the speed holes, there's always something about the designs. They're always very organic, that you can look at two different knives and know that they're your design. And one of those elements, at least for me, and going back to the very first knives that I got of yours, is that radius plunge, or that sweeping plunge. Now, I touched on this on the tabletop portion. I know how challenging it is to do a radius plunge, just doing it by hand. And again, I thank you for teaching me how to do that. But I made the assumption that any machined product, any knife that's going to be machine ground, that has got to be a daunting task to learn how to program that machine to do that specific type of plunge, especially for a company that really, all the knives that I've personally seen from them, I have not seen their entire catalog, have a very straight plunge, 90-degree plunge. So this may, and I don't know for sure, but this may be the first time they've done a sweeping plunge on their knives.
That was one of the challenges when I first started talking to them, and John Jr. is the one that runs the CNC grinder, and that was one of the things that he noticed first, and he was like, oh man, that's going to be tricky. And he figured it out. He got a really good plunge on every one of these things, where it's just a nice sweeping plunge. Yeah,
it's really close to the hand ground ones that you sent them.
It is, and that's something that we talked about at Blade Show, and he's like, I think I can do it. He goes, I'm going to have to work at it. I'm going to have to practice. I'm going to have to really see what I'm going to have to do. He goes, I'm going to have to program it different. And he did, and the very first ones he sent me, and the ones I saw pictures of, I was like, dude, you did it, man. You nailed it. And the hardest one so far has been the Kukri. You know,
oh, that had to be a nightmare.
He said he had to hold it up at weird angles and do all kinds of crazy things. It might even have two setups because of the orientation, the shape of that thing. But
so they really had to adapt in order to make your knives, which you would think would make the knives more expensive, because they're having to reteach themselves certain methodology. They're having to program their machines a certain way to just make your knives, because they're different than what the knives that they normally make are. Yet you're still in that $400 ballpark, depending on the size and design. That's really quite an achievement, given the expense of S35VN and all of these little intricate details they're putting in specific to your models.
It really is amazing that they were able to do that. And we agreed early on. He's like, no, I'm going to learn it. I'm going to learn that sweeping plunge, because that is very much a Todd Begg thing, and so I want to see that on him. And if they couldn't do it, if it's just going to be a 90-degree thing, I probably wouldn't have done it, because
because it's not you.
It's not me. It wouldn't have been my deal. So I was just like, he was so adamant that he thought he could do it, and I was like, well, let's go forward. And sure enough, man, he was able to do it and keep the price, you know, right there with other high-end production fixed blades.
Todd staring lovingly at this knife. This is the Recondo. This is the one I really, as I mentioned earlier in the video, I maintained ever since I saw Todd making the initial prototypes, all the hair stood up on my body, not just because I was in Todd's mere presence, but because he was playing with the dagger that day. I love daggers. I thought that's 100%, that's the one I'm going for. And then I put the Recondo in my hand. And the final production we have right here, Feels to me like it's lighter weight than the one that Todd made for the prototype. I can't be certain, but it's so lightweight. It's so well balanced. It feels so good in the hand. And I got to tell you, that top clip, the whole grind, everything about that knife is just pure dead sexy to me. And I see the way that you're looking at it. That's got to be one of your favorites too.
This is near and dear to my heart because I base this obviously off the Mac V SOG knife. And the reason that's so, near and dear to my heart is because the Mac V SOG basically morphed into what I did in the Army. So everybody that was in Recon wanted a real Mac V SOG knife. And early on, as a matter of fact, while I was in the military, I carried a knife from the SOG company, the Tiger Shark, and I just always loved that blade. And I wanted to do something a little smaller, a little more, carryable. But and then I came up with a Recondo. And for those that don't know, Recondo was a military school that ended up getting disbanded, and it was extremely difficult school from what I understand. It got disbanded before I got to that part of my training. But
this was Vietnam era type
and
stuff.
After and up into the 80s, it was such a difficult school that some of the cadre actually tortured some of the students to death. And it was an extremely difficult, and I know some people that went to it, and it was kind of like SEER school, but with more of an emphasis on reconnaissance. And it was, anyway, that's where the name came from, was Recondo. And so it's got the Mac V SOG inspired blade. It's got a nice little lower guard, nice prominent skull crusher. One of the things I did on this is I've got really big hands, so I tend to make a handle too big if I just make it comfortable for me. It's too big for most people.
Yeah.
So what I'll do is I'll make it just right for me, and then I'll shrink it by a few percent, and then it'll be just right for most people, while still being comfortable for a big hand. So that's why if it looks like this is kind of disappearing in my hand, it is. But this nice little skull crusher. There's another model coming out with a more of a shoot knife style blade that has the exact same handle. And that one's called the Meridian because it's kind of right in the middle of all of them. But this is one that I really like, and they absolutely nailed the grinds. Man, they did such a good job.
Yeah, it's hard to see in the black oxide finish, but to see that top clip, the way that it just gently goes into the tip, it perfectly accentuates the bevels. It looks amazing. But I did notice something as I was playing with it. It's a fast knife. It's so light and it's so well balanced. It really is a fast knife to manipulate.
It really is. It feels good in every direction. Even up here, you got a place to put your thumb if you really want to push that in without putting it up here on this actual skull crusher. Same thing this direction.
I think for me, if there was, out of the initial run here, the initial 4 designs, I think for somebody that they could only afford to buy one and they wanted the most all-around practical, everyday or backpack carry knife, I would point them toward the Recondo personally, because I think that does a little bit of everything, and it's a little bit lighter weight. There's something about it that just feels easier to carry somehow.
Yeah, it's a good choice. And I try to design something a little bit for everything and a little bit of something for everyone. But the old classic Bowie clip point blade, that's hard to beat, man. It's lasted so long for a reason. It works. And this one's going to be great for defense. It's going to be great for backpacking, everyday carry, whatever you're going to use it for, utility.
One thing I noticed is they did when you look at production knives, one of the first things that you always measure them up against other companies is their finished edges. And their edges look good, they're consistent, and they are sharp. There's so many companies nowadays and you can go on the forums, you can go on YouTube and listen to people talking about, let's say, brand X. I don't want to put anybody under the microscope here, but brand X for the past year has been delivering knives that just aren't sharp out of the box. These are stupidly sharp.
They're wicked sharp, yep. I was really happy about it. As a matter of fact, when they first sent them to me, I was like, well, it's going to be interesting to see how sharp they are. They came out just stupid sharp, man. And
when we're talking about sharpness, that's another hallmark of S35 Vienna, is it will take a nice razor edge. Let's talk about why you chose S35 Vienna as a steel. I touched on it a bit in the tabletop portion to help people understand that while we do hear S35 a lot, that we tend to take it for granted, it really is one of those great all-around steels. Yes, it's not a ridiculous, crazy S90V super steel. It's only good for one or two things. When you take EDC into account, it has to do a lot of things and do a lot of things very, very well. And S35VN has really been a great standard for basically corrosion resistance, stain resistance, edge retention, all these things all together. It does exceedingly well. And I had mentioned, we were talking about Chris Reeve knives, for example, a very specific heat treat recipe, which leaves the edge softer for his own reasons. And people have got that in their head that that is a byproduct of S35VN not holding an edge well. No, that is a specific side effect of their particular heat treat as a company, as a brand. But S35VN, when heat treated properly, actually has really, really good edge retention.
It does, and that's why I went with it. That it's American made. You know, that was extremely important. It had to be that. I think it's one of those steels that's right in the middle. It's just a perfect overlap of everything. You know, sure, there are other steels that are the super steels that are holding edge forever, but the problem with those is a lot of people can't sharpen them.
Yep.
You know, especially when you're out in a field environment, and most average users really don't know how to sharpen all that well. And so what's funny is you'll have, you know, whatever knife brand with super steel, you name it, and they get a reputation. It's like those are always dull. Well, it's just because the people that own them don't really know how to sharpen them. Some do, but the average person doesn't. He figures out how to use a stone and sharpen, and you can do that with this steel.
Yeah, S35VN is very easy to touch up and maintain yourself.
That's exactly it. That's one of the reasons I went with it. I think it's a good steel. I use it, you know, often, and I think it's just. And then also, White River Knives has a lot of history with it, and they've used it a lot, and they've gotten the good amount of performance out of the edge, and so you know, the heat treat and everything, they got it dialed in pretty good.
Yeah, they've got it dialed in. Can you recall off the top of your head what they were what the target was for the hardness?
They were going 5960.
Okay.
So that I have to check that a little closer, but that was what we initially talked about.
Okay.
Now we may go a point or two lower for some of the bigger ones that are coming out later for chopping.
Sure.
You know? But
Yeah, because you want more toughness than hardness at the edge.
Exactly, and that's what's far more critical on a bigger knife.
And this is going to be a great segue. As much as I don't want to get off the Recondo, because damn it, I love that knife. You want to talk about chopping? This knife right here, the Kukri, is absolutely insane. Now, you and I both really, really, really love Kukris for a lot of different reasons. There's an amazing history behind that design. It's done a lot of shit in its history, but not a lot of people, whether it be handmade customs or companies making production knives, have found that sweet spot where you still have a big serviceable blade in the true Kukri style, but that's manageable for carrying. I think this is a really good size for that.
This started, I had a guy come into my shop and he's like, I want to carry a Kukri. I want one I can carry and actually for defense. And I was like, well, let me design something a little bit smaller, because he didn't want a big huge one, but he loved Kukri. So this was left unsharpened by White River, just, you know, because most places you can't have double edge, but they're...
Yeah, I remember you made one custom about 2 years ago, and you sharpened that, and it was scary to be around.
Double edge, and the whole idea was, you know, you could have a Kukri with the slashing and chopping performance, but also have a double edge for back cuts or, you know, for penetration. This can be sharpened, by the way. It's ground thin enough. If a guy gets this and he's in a jurisdiction where he can have a double edge, then he can sharpen that. And
okay.
We're going to sell them that way, but otherwise it'll just be left unsharpened on the top. But, you know, yeah, there's a certain amount of chopping power with this one, and then if you notice the handle is kind of extra long. You've got this area here, and then you can go back on it like that to really get and start chopping on that sweet spot on a Kukri. You know, obviously a big, huge Kukri is going to chop a lot better, but
sure.
For something you can carry on your body and conceal, you know, you're going to actually have a lot of slashing and chopping power with that knife right there. And anytime you've got a reverse curve like that, when you're slashing through a target, this part right here tends to collect material and gathers it, and then this will...
Yikes. Well, we know it's effective. We're going to take a little break here. We'll be right back.
Yep.
Okay, while that may have been instantaneous for you, we have taken a good hour and a half off to tend to Todd's wounds after his Doug Marcaida impression. We know that it will cut.
So, yeah, you guys missed the product demo there. When I'm sitting here getting all into the geometry of it, and I did this, I shot myself right in the palm. Just touched just touched it and went about at least a 1/4 inch deep. You can see some fat and some meat and a vein. Yeah, it did its job. Just that little rounded part right there. So yeah, this is hazards of the job. I sure went in there deep, but I'm gonna.
Well, it's funny because you and I are, making knives all day, every day. We're used to working with a not fully sharpened knife until it's ready to go out the door. And we're doing things that you wouldn't normally do because we know that it's mostly dull. And now you're sitting here playing with a finished product, which you don't normally do. So we've all been there. We've all cut ourselves. I've done it on camera a couple of times, and it's all part of the fun. But really, when you get down to it, we were recently, just before that, talking about how certain companies don't really work on refining their edge, and we were talking about how sharp these really are. They are. It barely tapped you. It went a good 1/4 inch into your flesh, and it didn't even start bleeding till after the knife came out. So
I didn't even know I was cut. I thought I just kind of tapped myself, and when I looked down, and it opened up, and I was like, oh, yeah, okay, I'm cut.
That's always the fun of it. So anyway, back to, we were talking a little bit about why you chose to go with White River. They've got a really good history for customer service. They've got a good history for making good quality knives at an affordable price. Now these, if I'm not mistaken, are a little bit higher tier price-wise than what their typical production is. Am I right on that or wrong?
These are going to be a little bit higher price than what they typically do, and there's a couple of reasons for that. The designs themselves have a lot more machining. The exposed radius tang, the Begg flute, all the jimping, the 3D machined G10 sculpted handles, and the grinds themselves. Especially this one, from what I understand, was the most difficult to grind, to get that swoop in there with that big, curve in it. So there's a lot going on something like this, and what's right now they're actually finishing up on the sheath work, and so each sheath is custom designed and molded just for each knife.
Now, are these going to be Kydex or leather?
They're going to be Kydex. Later on, I'm planning on doing leather as an option, an upgrade if somebody wants to purchase one.
Great.
I plan on offering that, but they'll be Kydex, and then they each knife will come in a wooden box. If you've never seen how White River packages their knives, it's really cool. They machine a box that the knife and sheath just sits down in, it kind of clicks in this little deal, and then it has a lid that slides over. So it's a really cool thing that they do, and they're all going to have that, except for, I don't think the Kukri will. I think it's too big for the wood blanks that they use. So we'll have to figure out a zipper pouch, something like that, but they're sharp.
They're definitely sharp. They do their job. Now, if you were the customer and you walk up and you see, now again, there will be more models coming down the line. This is just the first run. But if you walked up to a table, saw these 4 knives sitting there, and you wanted a really good fixed blade that you could use every day, what would your one choice be if you could only pick one of these initial 4 designs?
Well, it really depended on what I was after.
If you just wanted an all-around, it will do everything for me, and that customer's watching right now going, I like all 4, but I can only afford to get one, what's going to be the best bang for the buck all around for everything?
It's going to be the least specialized, I guess you would say, would be either the Recondo or the all-terrain. The Dagger, that's pretty single purpose.
Yep.
The Kukri is a little bit more of an investment in size for you to carry around. Very capable for a lot of things, but a good EDC size will be the Recondo or the all-terrain. And then later on, the Meridian, which is essentially from here back, is identical, except it's a little bit shorter blade, and then it's more of a shoot grind. So that one for utility would be even better than the Recondo for everyday carry. But for now, I would go personally with the Recondo or the all-terrain.
Yeah,
I would probably go with the Recondo just because that point is so, that way it's more defensive minded for the point for penetration.
Now we have one more, just a little bit of a sneak peek to show everybody. There is another model coming very soon after these release.
This one is called the Kurgan, and I got the name for that off of the movie Highlander. He was the big mean guy that he had to face in New York. But this is a kind of a big, just nasty, buoy, upswept.
Looks like a pirate sword shrunken
kind of a
down.
Pirate sword, scimitar looking thing. It'll have 3D machined, G10 with checkering and all that. But this is a custom prototype, but it'll look just like that. Of course, it'll come in.
Look at that top clip! Oh my God!
See that switch, or that? Yeah, this can be sharpened. Now the prototypes I've made, it's sharpened here as well. And see, this is why I cut myself, because see, this is unsharpened, and I'm used to handling stuff like that. Anyway, that's the that's the Kurgan, and then there's a couple more coming. There's one called the Xerxes. That's just pure Persian, big double-edged Persian. That's coming out soon.
I remember when you made the custom. I can't believe that they're actually going to be able to replicate that. That was a really tricky one to grind, if I'm not mistaken.
Very tricky. But you know what? Given the fact that he was able to grind that, I think he could do the Persian. I really do. So.
Well, in closing, let's kind of wrap things up here. We've gotten a chance to look at all four of these close up and a sneak peek at the Kurgan. What would you say to somebody that's just discovering that Todd Begg, who only makes handmade custom knives, is now offering a production knife, and they're sitting there thinking to themselves, well, that's a big jump to go from, you know, $1,000, $2,000, $3,000, $4,000, $5,000 knives. What am I sacrificing? What am I losing by buying a $400 production knife?
I wouldn't say you're losing anything. What, you know, you're obviously not getting a full handmade knife by me, but you're getting a really well made, super sharp, USA made by a great company. They've got their logo on the back, White River Knife and Tool. And
they stand behind it with a warranty.
They do, and they're in Michigan. They're really good guys. And then I've got the War Junkie logo on the front. This is War Junkie Todd Begg. And you're getting a really good usable knife that with all my design input, and you know, and I'm closely watching the quality control and everything, and these guys are really committed to making a good knife. You know,
that's a good point when you say usable, because one of the big things that anytime that I've reviewed, like when I reviewed the Citadel, when you first put that out, when I reviewed a customer's full custom bodega, a lot of the comments were, that knife is so beautiful, I could never stand to use it. Now you have a Todd Begg design in your hand that you don't feel guilty about using, abusing, tearing up. Who cares what it looks like in a year? Because you know what? There's more being made. They're affordable enough to replace. You can beat the shit out of it and still go back and buy another one if you need to have that pretty one again.
And then the coating on these is PVD, which is a really durable coating, so that's going to last you a good long while. I wouldn't feel guilty at all about carrying that and using it, beating it up.
Well, it's certainly easier to use a $400 knife than a $4,000 knife, and I think we could all agree on that. No matter what stage you are in collecting, maybe you've never even dreamt about owning a $4,000 knife, but now you get to have a signature Todd Begg design that he is in control of, and that's really, really important. He's not answering to partners. He's not answering to investors. He's designing them the way that he designs his knives. The prototype is being handed over, and they are replicating them, I would say 99.95% to what that prototype was. So you have, and if they handed you a knife back and said, okay, here's our prototype of your knife, and you didn't like something about it, it just wouldn't get made.
It wouldn't get made, but I can tell you this. I expected a lot, and I suspected that they would do a really good job on it, but I was pleasantly surprised when I saw the first ones. I was like, man, you guys nailed it. They did a great job.
All right, guys, we're going to cut it off here. My battery's about to die. Thank you, Todd, for sharing the time with us and showing us the amazing designs and giving us an idea of why they are so important to you.
Thank you.
All right, guys, I will catch y'all on the next video.